Alright guys, so before I start this video, I want to make a couple disclaimers. First off, this video is not meant to be an attack on the class Pyro or anyone who plays Pyro. I personally love the Pyro as a class, and a lot of my closest friends are Pyro mains. I have absolutely nothing wrong with the Pyro as a class, and overall I'm doing this from a place of wanting to see the Pyro as a better class in TF2 in general, as well as improving the overall perception that Pyro has within the community. So, whenever I do start pointing out problems that I think the Pyro has, be aware that it is my opinion, and while I do think it is very well thought through, if you disagree, then just disagree. Please don't be, putting angry, hate-filled letters in my comment section because you disagree with me. Just disagree, explain why you disagree, and we can have a discussion about this. We can be reasonable. But this is not a personal attack. This isn't me, coming out to hate on the Pyro, because that is not what this is about. I want to point out a few issues that I believe the Pyro legitimately has and how I think they can be solved. This is meant to stir up discussion, and this is meant to bring out some critical thought. So, this is my opinion, and if you disagree with it, you have the full right to do so. But do not think that this is... this isn't a rant. This is me trying to calmly discuss what I think is wrong and what needs to be fixed. Alright, so to start things off, I suppose I should probably explain how I see the Pyro, their role in the team, and just in general what the Pyro should be, at least in my mind. So, the Pyro to me is kind of the opposite of the Heavy. It is a highly mobile offensive DPS class meant to do what the Heavy does, get in close and do a lot of damage and do a lot of sustained firepower, but with less defensive focus and more on just being able to be out there and really push the front line. In addition, I also see the Pyro as the generalist class of TF2. I know while other people talk about how, Soldier, Demo, their generalist classes, I think Pyro is the generalist class. He is meant to be the most versatile of any class, being able to adapt to a great variety of situations and play styles, such as Pyro or a Pockets. Overall, the Pyro has a great many uses: spy checking, projectile reflection, cleaning up, flanking. The Pyro is undoubtedly one of the most useful classes in the game and one of the most versatile. And I will say that wholeheartedly. I do very much like the idea of Pyro. I just think that there are a few things that need to be fixed. And on that point, I'm going to start on the first thing that I think is wrong with Pyro. So the first thing is that the Pyro is almost completely dependent on crits for most of the viability it has as a class. Now, I know some of you might be saying, well, I've seen, stock Pyros do just fine and work with stuff like the Home Wrecker and a shotgun and, not do anything with crits. But consider this. Out of the primary weapons, 50% are crits. Of secondary weapons, 66% have a crit-based mechanic. Of the melee weapons, 33%. Of the 144 possible combinations of weapon loadouts for the Pyro, the chances of you having a crit-using gimmick within your loadout is 50%, theoretically. That is much higher, though, since most of Pyro strats are based around effectively using crits, such as flare punching, backburner flanking, flare jumping, and power jack, combo Pyro with the degreaser, and phlogistinator. A lot of Pyro strategies revolve around using and abusing the crit-based weapons. Now let's talk about some of these weapons that have a huge problem in crits and being able to abuse them to an insane degree. I'm going to be going over all the weapons which do such, save for the Man Melter, the Neon Annihilator, and the Extinguisher. The reason I will not on those three weapons is the Man Melter is a support weapon which does gain crits, but only if there is an enemy Pyro. Essentially, the counter to it is to not play Pyro. And it rewards crits for doing team support, which is absolutely fine in my book. If you're rewarding crits for getting kills or doing an actual supportive action, that is absolutely fine. Then there is the Neon Annihilator, which only gets crits in water. The amount of maps that actually have water that is actually usable, non-existent. So that one is extremely hard to abuse unless you just play 2-fort exclusively. Which, if you do that, chances are you're very new to the game or just hate yourself. Then there's the Extinguisher, which is actually a pretty good combo weapon, and the only problem with it as a crit weapon is the fact that it's way too slow to be usable. So let's start with Phlogistonator, which is the most infamous of all crit-based abuse weapons. This weapon removes Air Blast and requires an extremely low damage build to gain what is essentially a crit streak charge, in addition to an on-demand Uber charge, which you can use and abuse as a get-out-of-jail-free card, all with no damage penalty, to reduce the power of crits or make the charge requirement long enough to be fair to the enemy team. This weapon allows you to use the stupid amount of damage you can get out of WM1ing people to get even more stupid damage out of WM1ing people. While the whole time, it doesn't even punish so much as the activation of it through a taunt, because it allows you to uber charge your way through that taunt, meaning you can use the Phlogistonator whenever you're getting focus fired the hell out of, taunt, tank all the damage you would take from everyone firing at you, and then have crits for 8 seconds where you can just walk at people and they just die. Nothing they can do. Which is just completely stupid. Now, if you're going to keep this sort of mechanic, you need to make some adjustments in order to make this actually fair. First thing, do not Uber the taunting Pyro. I would suggest changing it to a full heal rather than an Uber charge. A full heal would allow Pyro to recover and allow Pyro to take some more damage. However, it would not make the Pyro completely invincible. So if the Pyro decides to pop Flog in the middle of the enemy team that is focus firing the ever-loving hell out of him, it's not going to work. So they can't abuse that in order to just pop in the middle of the enemy team. In addition, I would also reattach the 10% damage penalty to the Phlogistonator, or perhaps an even higher damage penalty, which would make it take longer for the Phlogistonator to charge, and thus make it a hell of a lot less abusable. Then, there's the backburner. The backburner relies on a Pyro flanking opponents in order to get crits by hitting them in the back and just melting them down in a second. At least theoretically. What actually happens is more or less buggy flame particles and the fact that it has no frontal damage penalty and the ability to random crit. This weapon marginally punishes Air Blast as its only downside for a stupidly high DPS for what is essentially a straight upgrade. This weapon allows you to do stupid damage at any angle and then adds crits on top of that. And the only thing to downside it is the fact that you can only do 4 air blasts consecutively instead of 8, which, if you're needing to do that many air blasts at once, chances are you're playing pyro tennis and have no need for a flamethrower in the first fucking place. My solution, of course, is to add a damage penalty, just a straight damage penalty on the whole thing, maybe 20%, in order to decrease the overall DPS and make crits much more useful and necessary to the back burner while punishing poorly positioned WM1. If you're trying to just front WM1 someone with a 20% damage penalty back burner, then it's not going to work. You simply don't have the damage for it. But if you focus and play the back burner right and get behind opponents and flank them, then you have a chance. In addition, of course, remove random crits in this thing. Just make sure random crits do not ever happen on this thing, because no weapon that can get its own crits should ever be able to random crit. Next up is the flare gun. And I know this one's going to be a little controversial because a lot of pyros really like their flare gun. And while it does require skill and timing, and it's not a terrible weapon, my problem with it is that the crit requirements are stupidly easy for a pyro. On-fire crits for a pyro are like giving a heavy a shotgun that does crits for doing bullet damage. It doesn't reward kills or crits or even assisting the team. It overcompensates the poor power of the pyro by rewarding the class for existing and simply doing damage. In addition, the flare gun causes fire damage, which means it makes its own crits. It self-fulfills its own crit requirement. This means that the flare gun does crits for simply hitting someone more than once, which is an absolutely stupid, unfair, unbalanced, unfun, and just overall bad mechanic for any class, and I don't know why it was acceptable for the pyro. If you're going to have a crit mechanic on the flare gun or any weapon, make it something that actually has a skill-based thing for it and not just get crits for landing more than one shot. My suggestion is giving it the reserve shooter's mini crit requirement, allowing for a much fairer crit combo while still preserving the aim requirement and flare punching tactic the flare gun has. Meaning that the flare gun now is the air blast punch weapon, but is a weapon that is much more fair than the reserve shooter because you can use it to more precisely aim at your opponent. In addition, you can also use it to punish rocket jumping soldiers in demos and perhaps work with other pyros and your other blast damage classes to hit opponents that have been popped up. In addition, I would boost the power of the flare gun by 15 to 20% to help compensate for the removal of on-fire crits, making it a little more powerful but a lot more fair. The Scorch Shot. It suffers many of the same issues as the flare gun, but it has a lot less damage and a lot more spammability. My idea for the Scorch Shot would be to make it a much more supportive weapon for perhaps handling swarms and whatnot. I would increase the base damage by 10 to 15% and make it cause an increased afterburn damage, perhaps even double. This would allow us to work with weapons such as the Degreaser and preserve the afterburn while at the same time increasing afterburn in such a way that it would be much more useful to perhaps pester swarms and heckle at a distance. I would also consider giving it an extra damage bonus to buildings or the ability to damage sappers, either of which would be very interesting to me, but I personally think it'd be cool to have a weapon that could damage sappers at range, which would give the pyro a lot more range as pyro and just really be able to help the engineer and be much more helpful to the team. And then there's the reserve shooter. I'm not quite sure what to do with the reserve shooter, because there's a lot of things to consider. Considering that it is a multi-class weapon, any adjustment would be done through the soldier as well, and thus make some problems for a weapon that is already overused by one and almost unusable by another. And the fact that the mini crit requirement is stupid because air blasting and then having to take the time to shoot someone with a shotgun, which is easy as all fuck. It's just stupid. It's completely stupid. I am not quite sure how to adjust it. I think it would probably have to be broken into two separate weapons for the soldier and the pyro. And I'm going to be completely honest, I have no idea what to do with the reserve shooter. It is something I've thought about and just have not come up with a satisfactory answer. If you have an idea of what to do with the reserve shooter in order to make it more fair and balanced, I would love to hear it. Alright, so that sums up what I think is wrong with the weapons and what needs to be done to fix them. And I know many of you might be asking, well, I saw your random crit video. I saw that you wanted to keep crits. Why are you opposing the fact that Pyro has so many crit options? Well, because my opinion on crits has changed a little bit. I still think that they have a place, but I think they should be very, very limited. And the fact that theoretically 50% of all Pyro loadouts are going to involve some sort of crit mechanic, that implies that crits have been so permeated into how the Pyro plays that they're almost inevitable to use. And that presents a problem because whenever there's that many crit weapons in a class, that means that the class on its own has been designed in such a way where either it has just been poorly designed in such a way that it allows anyone to just have a crit mechanic. They just will give the Pyro anything, or the Pyro in and of itself is designed so weakly that it needs crits for viability. I would go with the latter. I think that the Pyro on its own, a stock Pyro, doesn't have the power it needs in order to be fully effective in almost every situation. However, giving it the crit mechanics makes it way too powerful, as crits simply have way too much damage potential and are by far one of the most infuriating, frustrating, and just unfun ways to die, fight against, or just deal with in TF2. The more that crits are used as a mechanic in a certain class, the more people are going to die by crits, and the more people are going to hate it. I think that these crit mechanics are one of the big reasons why people hate the Pyro. And I think that by adjusting it to where the Pyro no longer needs them, you can make the Pyro much more fun, much more enjoyable within the community, and overall just a better class. Alright, so I believe that Pyro does need quite a bit of fixing. And the reason I went so deep into all the crit mechanics that Pyro has to abuse is because I believe they are an overcompensation for the Pyro. I believe that the Pyro is actually a relatively weak class that doesn't have a lot of power unless there are crit mechanics in the way to help compensate, and in this case, way overcompensate for the weaknesses that the Pyro has. So I believe that fixing this involves cutting the crap and buffing the basics. So I've already gone through all the crit mechanics and everything that I believe need to be adjusted and or removed. So let's talk the basics. So Pyro, what does Pyro need in order to make themselves much more usable? What can we do to make Pyro great again? Well, let's start with the flamethrower. The flamethrower in and of itself doesn't have a whole lot of power. So most people don't use it. They like to stick with their secondaries, they like to stick with their combo Pyro, unless they're using Flog or Backburner. Why is that? Well, because it doesn't have a whole lot of power, and thus getting killed with it is W1, because you have to sit around and chase someone for a couple seconds and waste ammo just dumping on them, waiting for them to die. The improvement to this in order to make it an actual usable weapon in which you're not necessarily W1ing, you're just using a friggin' weapon like it should be. I believe that the flamethrower needs a higher DPS. However, I do not think that a damage boost is the right way to do this. I think that it should be a fire rate increase, because fire rate increases both improve damage per second while providing their own nerf and balance in and of itself, by the fact that by increasing fire rate, you increase ammo consumption. This allows the Pyro to have more damage, but at the cost of using more ammo per second, and thus self-balancing. It essentially adds in a mechanic where the Pyro is now more viable with the flamethrower, but must be much more careful not to use up their flamethrower. They're going to burn it out. In addition, I believe that the Pyro probably does need some extra abilities to help it out. Perhaps a few more support mechanics. Perhaps a higher regen rate for extinguishing. Perhaps the ability to burn to burn buildings or something. I would like to see something with afterburn where it actually doubles the damage but halves the duration. That way it just kills you faster and doesn't waste the time and do the infuriating dance of, oh, I'm 2 steps away from the health pack and now I'm dead. Overall, I just think that Pyro needs some basic buffs in the basic areas to make the Pyro a much more viable and better class without the need for the overcompensation of crits. Anyway, that's all I have to say about the Pyro at this time. If you would like, I'd love to do videos of this sort on the other classes, perhaps explain what I think is wrong with them, what I think should be done to fix them, and just, kind of do that sort of thing. If you like this video, please like, subscribe, and share. And feel free to check out my Discord, my Steam group, all that sort of stuff. That should all be in the description. And if you disagree with me, feel free to put it in the comments, tell me what you think, and I'll see you in the next video, and you all have a nice day.